yes. I think Joshua is our expert.
Yeah.
Simon Conway Morris would argue yes, that there is enough, we have enough examples from convergence to say there is a predictability with certain levels of consciousness and freedom as well. You could say that such things are highly adaptive, and insofar as they're highly adaptive, you'll find them wherever you go in the cosmos. So there's a number of folks out there that say there is a good degree of predictability with those.
Conway Morris, you could predict how complexity emerges.
Yes, that it will emerge within certain constrained areas. Certain, you'd say, nodes of morphological space. Certain areas. There's only certain areas that are inhabitable, and you will see those again and again.
So that'll be a generalized specificity.
I think so. Yeah.
Let me speak to this. I see Ron Olivan's hand here. I've had a chip on my shoulder for a while, and it's had to do with our culture, especially since the Second World War, adopting a kind of naive relationship between evolution and progress. Progress or evolution means progress, and the New Age spiritual people are evolving every day. And where this becomes a problem in an area that I like to work, having to do with speculations about life on other planets, is that the doctrine of progress has slipped into the view of evolution, so you can hear people say it again and again, well, if evolution is taking place on another planet and it's 1 million years ahead of us, think about how smarter they're going to be. Then the next thing is, of course, they will be more advanced in science and technology. Oh, interesting. Well, who's saying this? Well, somebody in science and technology. So if you got 1 million more years to evolve, you're going to start looking like me because I'm the most highly evolved person here on Earth. And then you just throw in the secularization principle that says religious people are stupid, out of date, anachronistic, and less highly evolved than the scientific community. So all of this flows together into an ideology of progress and evolution, and here on Earth, the scientists should be the high priests of human knowledge. And I've called this the ETI myth. It's a myth because it doesn't have any empirical evidence to support it. And I usually pull out my holy trinity of Ernst Mayr, Stephen Jay Gould, and Francisco Ayala in order to make my case that this is not good science. So then Joshua comes along. And Joshua, as a partial disciple of Simon Conway Morris, now says, no, there's a good reason for believing this. And I want to say, okay, good. If we really do have a good, solid scientific argument for convergence and this kind of belief, well, I'm starting to feel better about that. But I would like to think that the other people in our culture would maybe pay attention to Joshua and Simon Morris, because at least there you have an empirical argument with some good reasoning, and not this sort of bland evolution is progressive sort of assumption that we've been working with. So that's the end of my chip. There's Mr.
Can I add a
right.
add a footnote?
Yeah.
Just to, affirm what you said, Ted, and also remind us of the truism, like even the idea of survival of the fittest does not, of course, translate into a better, say, just most persistent. We can also think of survival of the fittest as leading to something that is a very bad thing, but very persistent. But that is a thought, an idea that our secular culture doesn't even acknowledge. And certainly I like what you call the myth kind of, which has to be kind of deconstructed and at
Right.
least questioned.
Yeah, and I think it should be deconstructed two ways. Theologically, theologians demythologize because they want to have a genuine relationship with God that's not clouded by crummy beliefs. But there should be a scientific version of demythologization as well, one that recognizes what we know empirically and have confidence in, and then recognizes the other stuff as ideology that lays on top of it.
No pressure, Josh.
Yeah, well, I think an example is you could talk about survival of the fittest and say, well, at the end result, evolution is reigned by nepotism and favoritism. Or is it love of family and friends? Right, so what slant do you put on that? It's really, I mean, I think that's part of the language. Or, you know, you think about, we're talking about Justin Barrett's work. If there is an evolutionary trend towards cognitively intuitive theism, that is based on our cognitive architecture, which is based on our detection of agency, which is an evolutionarily derived capacity that you will see again and again and again. So every culture, in every world, in that understanding will be, you know, cognitively intuitive in terms of theism. So you could say, well, if you have convergence towards Justin Barrett's understanding of agency, then that is the end of evolution, right? Theism. So I mean that's a very different slant. If you wanted to go in that direction, you certainly could go in that direction because there's data pointing in that direction. I mean, at least there's people arguing that on an empirical basis. So yes, slant is important.
Okay, we got Ron, I think, is next, and
I was
there's
just
a couple
gonna
more
make
after that.
comment on cognitive architecture kind of things. Recent studies done by, in fact, the last decade, Stephen Wolfram on self-replicating automatons, and Gerhard Kloof has just recently come out with a new physics developed on that same process, where you can have complexity out of many, many iterations of these very, very simple forms. And Wolfram even gets, say, the Laplace's equation of the Fibonacci series directly out of these activities.
Interesting.
It's rather remarkable that these sort of islands of complexity arise in a very, very natural way. And that, in fact, is the same architecture that the brain has with microtubules and that sort of thing. We have a mimic in nature of this sort of conceptual basis for whatever we're talking about here. It's rather remarkable.
That's very
I
interesting.
didn't know.
I think, Bob, you...
Quickly, Reverend Peters. When I was talking about mutualism and so forth, I came up with the concept of centripetality. I always regarded that as a proto-self. Okay, now the irony here, if you will, is that the idea of selfhood relies on mutualism at a lower level, but also competition. There can be no competition, which is, of course, the ultimate background of neo-Darwinism and so forth, cannot exist unless mutualism is there at the next level and is primary. So I guess my question is, someone once described original sin as original selfishness, okay, which is, I guess, the Pelagian direction that you were going in. Would you then think of the ability to love as being the ultimate expression of free will?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first of all, in centripetality, I like that, and that's one of the things I've learned the last couple of days. I want to go back, as I mentioned, to Volume 2 of Paul Tillich's Systematic Theology, where he's describing the self in a non-metaphysical way, and he uses centering, where you use centripetality as a tendency. So now let's get to the question. If you're a centered self, and now you're going to love your neighbor for the sake of your neighbor, well, you could dissipate yourself, I suppose. But we all know, or at least in the modern West, that's unhealthy. And so I think what Christians probably mean, although I haven't worked this out, is that if you have a robust, centered self and you love a neighbor, you can do far more benefit from that neighbor just because you're a robust, centered self than if somehow or other you were to let yourself fall apart, in one fashion or another. So I think that there's got to be some magic in there of some kind, where a strong self actually has a greater capacity for self-giving than a weak self would. But I have to say that I can't quite make that coherent, even though existentially I believe it. Yeah. Don.
Yeah, I like what you had to say about ideology. Like Bob and Kelly pointed out, that philosophers of science are interpreting neuroscientific data to say things that neuroscientists aren't saying. Others are interpreting things that evolutionary biologists do to say things that we're not saying.
Yeah.
In the last 20 years, there's been 3 or 4 textbooks that I use to teach evolutionary theory deal with that issue of progress immediately, because we can talk about survival and fitness. We don't talk about survival of optimal. My question for you guys, though, is aside from that, especially for Belly and Josh, and I think Alicia too. So, given that the scant evidence tells us that creatures like Neanderthal and Denisova, maybe Denisova, but buried their dead and
Yeah.
used tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where does all this leave them? Were they victims of a natural evil? I think somebody used it. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, theologically, that's been a large part of my own focus, because you have, the Denisovans, you have, bracelets that are found in the same layers, polished out of, green stone. You have Neanderthal, use of body art. So you have, jewelry, right? Burnishers to work leather. So you have a handful, maybe as many as 6 that we know of that are represented in genetic admixture. 6 non-human hominids.
Are they not human?
Well, it depends that's how you define human, right? Genetically distinct.
They have,
Yeah.
we share part of their genome.
Yeah,
Some of us, some of our
yeah,
races do,
yeah.
some don't.
So
So
2 to 5%, right?
That in terms of this
Yeah.
complexity, this emergence,
Yeah, I asked Svant.
away from genetics and
Yeah, I asked Svant. I can never pronounce his last. Pablo. It's Pablo Svant. Yeah. Where do you make that genetic line? And he said, 10% maybe, something like that.
Huh.
How do you define? It was just a random number he threw out. He said, maybe less, more, depending who you are. But I think the question of when are they human or not? That's a huge question. I think it's a debated question. But if we're talking about interbreeding with them, well, they're at least human enough that we didn't make that distinction. But they're genetically different enough that we can say, okay, well, are they a different species? And does that matter? But my point is, it's all continuum anyway. It always is. It always was. So these lines that you draw, it's not a Darwinian way to go about the world. So I'm interested in the spectrum as a whole. Freedom emerges, but it's a spectrum of freedom. And there's different organisms that approach that and reach the same. I think Neanderthals reached that same level of freedom that we did. The reasons they're not there theologically, I think that's a deeper question. But I think it doesn't matter in the final assessment. I think that's where eschatology comes in, is because it's the redemption of kol basar, all flesh, all living things. And that's not just humans, right? The Logos became sarx, not man, not human being, right? Not even mammal. but flesh. So I think there's a redemption focus on redemption and incarnation that is beyond humanity. That's in the Scripture itself. That the Jewish and Christian Scriptures. That we need to get back to that focus. So that would be my theological response.
And can I add, going back to the very beginning of the question, just a very foundational observation. I think all of us agree on that. Theologically speaking, while it is very important for us who are theologians to be taught by you guys and others about what's the genetic and all the commonalities between us and the rest. Of course, in the final analysis, it is ultimately a philosophical and theological decision as to where to locate the distinctively human species. And I think it allows for it gives, there might be some wiggle room in terms of how much genetic or any commonality there will be. And now if I speak from the perspective of Abrahamic or say Judeo-Christian tradition, in our Holy Scriptures, to us the idea of the image of God is given, which means that we are placed in some kind of personal relationship with our Creator in a way that is a little bit different from the rest of the creatures. All creatures certainly are before God. But I think that the point of the biblical story when it talks about the image of God is that while there might not be anything uniquely distinct about us, soul or anything, or whatever is the debate, but we have been put in a very unique relationship. But again, so this is a theological decision, and also what you Joshua said, it doesn't in any way exclude the very holistic and cosmic idea of redemption, because even if we are going to be saved, we are going to be saved in the bigger matrix of this creation, and yet probably again our placement or our responsibility to God is different from, say, lions or lower mammals.
Okay, we have time for one comment from Alicia.
Yeah, if I may jump in, I'd like to broaden that because I think that the whole notion of complex dynamical systems raises or forefronts the issue of boundaries big time.
Yeah.
Because if you talk about context-sensitive constraints, really embedding the system in the environment, and in a sense, you're importing the environment into the system, you're extending the system out into the environment with tentacles, raises that question big time, which in turn raises the question of identity big time. Because we've normally thought, oh, well, identity is whatever's inside the boundary and everything else is other. But now if you have a problem with identifying boundaries, then you've got problems with identity too. So I don't think it's just in terms of the question of the human species. It's in question of where you locate any type, any
Good point.
Species problem.
species,
Yeah, very good.
species,
Yeah.
where anything gets really difficult.
Yeah.
Nature's.
We're almost out of time. Really brief comment?
Yes, a quick question on ask. The extension of all this, if we make I never thought of this before, but if we make the assumption that Neanderthal was human, and we look at their history, is that saying that we really don't know what our future could be, that God could allow our subspecies to die off too?
I would say yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think in the final assessment it doesn't matter because you need the eschatology. I think that's the point of eschatology, is that nothing good will be lost. My own understanding of the Imago Dei is through Hebrew election, right, which is Abraham, Sarah brought to a different land, given a purpose for the sake of blessing. I think that's what humans are. So if we were chosen among other hominins, well, we're chosen to be a blessing. But the blessing is not just to us; it's to all of creation.
Yeah.
So I think whether we live or die, in the grand scheme of things, It's not the, we're all going to die anyway, right? Much sooner than that. And there's, in the cosmic scheme, it's not a big difference.
What an uplifting idea to end.
Thank you, Josh.
We'll make it
We were
different.
feeling like a little bit energized.
Good to have you with us.
Cosmic pessimism.
Yes.
Are these presentations going to be on the web or
This
accessible?
session, yes, this afternoon will be on the web.
Okay,
It's being taped, videotaped. Okay, so thank you all for coming. And thanks again to Calvin College and the John Clifton Foundation for the initial grant. And look forward to the book coming out of the process.
And Bob, we want to thank you as well.
Yeah, Bob, yeah. You're much behind the scenes.
Yes.